Welcome. My name is Alex Fullick, and my presentation today is Fear plus Support equals Resilience. Professor Donald Brown from the University of California, Santa Barbara, in his 1991 book, Human Universals, outlines 5 common fears that all civilizations, all people have, regardless of where we are in the world, what time period our society existed. There are 5 common fears: fear of outsiders, fear of chaos, fear of the future, fear of death, and the fear of insignificance. Dr. Robert Quigley, speaking at a conference in 2019, who is a well-known wellness expert, suggested that organizations need to create a culture of health and wellness with supporting structures in place to help increase individual resilience and organizational resilience. One, in turn, will help the other. Focusing on mental wellness will help people deal with their trials, tribulations, and fears, and will help increase their resilience, or at least put them on a path to resilience. Support doesn't just appear. Even when organizations have programs in place, we need to work on these, and we've got to build our support systems. Resilience itself, as Dr. Michael Unger, author of Changing Your World, says, resilience is a process. I agree. You can't buy resilience off a shelf, or sign up for an application and suddenly you become resilient. That's not the way it works. It's a product of who you are and what you've experienced. And that's the same with organizations. It's who they are, what they've experienced, and what they learn from those experiences. That's what will help organizations become resilient. So through our time today, I'm going to talk about these 5 fears and how COVID-19 especially is affecting us right now, and what we can do about it to address these fears with COVID. But I'm also going to give you some examples of individuals that have experienced these fears, gone through these fears, and come out the other end stronger and more resilient. So let's look at our first fear, shall we? The first one is the fear of outsiders. In today's world with COVID-19, we've closed our borders. We don't want outsiders coming in with the chance of bringing the virus with them. We've closed our facilities. We don't want anyone wandering through them, especially people we don't know. We've closed our streets. We've closed our transit systems. We've closed our schools. Everything to stop people we don't know who may or may not be carrying COVID-19. As asymptomatic people or people who are showing any signs. I know when I go grocery shopping or out to the store, anywhere, a slight sneeze or a cough gets me quite the look. People fear me, and there's nothing to fear about me. Our old age homes and care homes, these people lost some of their support systems because they were shut down in a way that visitors could no longer come and see them. Their support systems, their children, their husbands or wives, their grandchildren, these people are their support system, and they no longer had access to them. Because anybody that came into those old age homes with people that are so susceptible to COVID-19 were feared. Who knew what was going to happen? And here in Ontario, we had quite the problem with many people in old age care homes dying from COVID-19 because people, with outsiders coming into these places, there was the fear they could bring the disease in with them. Rebecca Solnit, the author of A Paradise Built in Hell, very interesting book, by the way, talks about the San Francisco earthquake on April 18th, 1906. It was a 7.9 earthquake, and 3,000 people at least were killed, with many more thousands killed, and half the city was homeless. Leadership was lacking, and there was a thought that people would take advantage of the situation, and there would be a lot of looting and a lot of rioting. Neither one occurred, but some outsiders decided to come in and help out and take charge of the situation. The outsiders was actually the army. The army came in and they assumed that everyone would take advantage of the situation. As, as I say, they would loot and cause riots. Didn't help. They started to try and help the situation. They created some fire breaks in neighborhoods to stop the damage spreading throughout the city. And they adopted a kill on sight mentality. Shoot first, ask questions later. And I just want to stress, the military were not asked by local authorities to come into the city. They took it upon themselves to come in. So people were shot trying to get food, even when store owners said that people could have their food rather than have it rot on a shelf. Solnit even tells of one story where a gentleman was seen rummaging through rubble and was shot and killed. It turned out he was trying to save someone trapped in the rubble. It's not known how many people were killed by these outsiders, the army, that were never asked to be there. But the people that thought they were saviors were actually had become the mob they thought they were going to be protecting San Francisco citizens from. They created mayhem, fear, and they did not help anyone, and they were asked to leave by local authorities. They created chaos, our next fear. Chaos and COVID-19 went together, especially for a lot of first-line responders who were struggling to find PPE, or personal protective equipment, old age care homes, which I mentioned. Anyone that did get sick, there were not enough people to care for them, as people became sick faster in greater numbers than actual workers or staff at hospitals and care homes and clinics. It caused also a problem for all of our technology groups. Sure, a lot of them had access for people to work from home. They could do things remotely, and usually, let's say, roughly 10-15% on a daily basis, people were working from home for various reasons. Suddenly, everyone had to work from home, creating chaos for technology departments who, in some cases, had to acquire equipment, find ways securely to ship this equipment to people and their homes, making sure that privacy was in place, security was in place, everyone could dial in, and key operations could continue. Suppliers were shut down, and not just general suppliers. Even if your supplier that you deal with one-on-one was okay, at some point their supplier further down or up the chain had an issue, eventually impacting you. There was no one unimpacted or not impacted by COVID-19, creating chaos up and down supply chains. You could no longer look at a single link. You now have to look at the entire chain. Solnit also talks about the Halifax Explosion. I don't know if you're aware of this. December 6, 1917. Two ships in the Halifax harbor, the Norwegian-flagged SS Imo and the French-flagged SS Mont Blanc. The Mont Blanc was carrying a very significant amount of explosives destined for Europe during World War I. Normally, ships with explosives weren't allowed into the harbor, but due to German U-boat activity, the rule was laxed at this time, and the boat was allowed into the harbor. The two collided, even though they tried to miss each other, and downtown Halifax was obliterated. Halifax, Nova Scotia, they found debris miles and miles away. 2,000 to 3,000 people were killed, with thousands more injured. Chaos ensued because it was World War I, and people started running through the streets fearful, believing that this bomb, no one knew what it was yet, was German airplanes dropping bombs or something from U-boats or ships bombing the city. Luckily, after a couple of hours, that was proven to be false, but people were still fearful, considering half the city had now just been laid flat. Surprisingly, in the Halifax situation, the army came in to help in this chaos, but didn't lead the response. They took direction from local authorities who needed it. And as something that you may be interested in knowing, the Red Cross, that is when it first stepped into Canada at the Halifax disaster in 1917. To this day, there's an affinity between Halifax and Boston, Massachusetts, because Boston sent a bunch of doctors up to help build tents and mobile hospitals back then to help with the injured. You know, these outsiders did not cause chaos. They came in and took direction from there, and the city was able to keep going and prepare properly and respond and care for a lot of people. It went a lot smoother. To this day, especially the last 30, 40 years, Halifax sends Boston a large Christmas tree every year, and it gets set up in Boston Common as a way of saying thank you for the help that these doctors, these outsiders, did to alleviate some of the chaos that was ensuing in Halifax. Kathleen lived in Headley, Hampshire, England, and became a widow in 1942 as a result of losing her husband during World War II. Suddenly, she was faced with the fear of raising and supporting her son, Richard, alone with an uncertain future. Her parents took care of her son while she worked to make ends meet, entered the service, and oversaw large households to help military with everyday life activities. After the war, she stayed with the military, the Army to be exact, and became head of the officers' mess. She met her new husband in 1943, and more children came shortly thereafter, but it was hectic and hard for them. Complete chaos ensued because she went from a married family woman to all of a sudden being alone, a widow, an uncertain future, not knowing what was going to happen, and surviving on ration books, which many British people after the war especially may remember. For her, it was a chaotic life, trying to work, juggle new children. Luckily, she met a new husband late in 1943, and more children came shortly thereafter. Still having to live with the ration books and working with local family members and support systems where if somebody was in need, people would share their ration books. If they didn't need something or could get by without something, shared it with a family who really did need it. My own chaotic life occurred on February 9th, 2017, when I lost my father. I did not know what to do. It was the first time anyone that close had passed. And as the oldest child, a lot of the decisions on what was to happen went to me. And I did not know what to do. Luckily, I had a brother who was there with me all the way. But I had to make a lot of decisions. I didn't know who to talk to, where to go. I had to talk with a lot of banks and different companies to cancel accounts, cards, insurance, working with the government. The only thing I knew for sure is that my father wanted to be cremated and laid to rest back home in England. And in that case, I also ended up having to talk with British government representatives, Canadian government, airlines, funeral homes in the UK and here in Canada to make sure I knew I could transport his ashes the right way. And after 8 months, I was finally able in October 10th, 2017, to finally lay him to rest. But that time in between was complete chaos for me because I never had the chance to grieve. With Dad's ashes sitting here at home, I was reminded every day of what I lost. And until October 10th, I could never grieve properly and move forward. Our next fear is the future. COVID certainly has questioned our future. What is going to happen? What should we do? What are we not going to do? Are our schools going to be open? When they've opened, how long are they going to open? Universities, our offices. We don't know what's going to happen. As we've seen around the world, we are opening up businesses again. We're opening up restaurants. We're opening up schools, only to see them slowly slide back. Parents pulling their children out of school. I have friends who are doing that. As we're seeing the numbers for COVID-19 go up, no one knows what to do. If they're being called back to the office, is it safe to go back? Why do they need to go back? Is the facility clean? Will it continue to be clean? How distant will we be sitting beside our colleagues? A lot of times we were literally side by side. But now, what's going to happen? Is the floor being remodeled? Do some of us get to stay home? If we stay home and the schools close again, now what happens? You know, I can't work all the time if I have to worry about my son or my daughter, as many parents are starting to think. And Konstantin Karbaliotis, who is a privacy and security expert, I kind of touched on this earlier, has said that the future is causing a lot of challenges for technology right now because during COVID, the increase is there now for more problems with security and privacy violations. In fact, it's spiking. All the ransomware attacks and the different email phishing scams are going through the roof right now. And it's in a way a little bit easier for these people to compromise systems because now they can just focus on one person at home when they used to just have to, or were focusing on large organizations. Now they can just focus on who's working at home. So the future is holding a lot more challenges for us. We don't know what's going to happen. And organizations, when we do go back to work, we have to consider something that we may not have had to have considered very much before: our well-being of employees. And by employees, I include management, senior management, board of directors. Everybody is an employee. Employee is not just a data entry person and management being immune to well-being situations. No, everyone is involved with that. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to contend with in the future. In fact, that's going to change how our offices work. I think that's going to have a big impact on our industry and many other situations as we go forward. Gail was a young mother. She was caring for her new family, raising young children, while also caring for her mother, who was suffering from cancer, succumbing to the disease in February of 1969. Gail is fearful of the future because she's had a sister pass away in 2000 of cancer, and her brother pass away of cancer in 1989, as well as her mother, as well as a couple of aunts and cousins. So Gail has learned from that and sees her doctor every 6 months, goes for tests, makes sure that she is following all directions, takes no chances. She says her future is bright, and she will look at the positive side because she's learning from everything that happened before: better medicines, better communications with her doctors. You know, when she was taking care of her mother, it was a country doctor who used to drive around in a big car and come and visit. Now she can pick up the phone and talk to her doctor, you know, right away if she needs to, if there's a problem or if she needs to get something looked at right away, you know, with all the cancer scares. She has had 2 breast cancer scares already. But as I said, on the bright side, she's also had a couple of cousins, Caroline, Pam, and Hazel, who are all cancer survivors. So her future, though, isn't completely dictated, as for having cancer. She does have some new bright spots to look forward to, and she does focus on that. Ron was a carpenter who cut his hand very badly on a table saw. He almost lost it. He'd only been in Canada for 5 months with 3 little girls and $121 in his pocket. He was off work for a traumatic 3 months, eventually losing movement in one finger and the joint in his thumb, but luckily keeping his hand. As his wife Jean said, he was a very brave man and never gave up. What would have happened with his future had he lost his hand? He was new to Canada from the UK. Would he have packed up and gone back? He had a support system of family that he didn't know very well in Canada, but they stuck with him, and he was able to get through those months. They, as a family, were able to get through those months. An uncertain future, and he got through. He eventually got back to work in carpentry and ended up building quite a few of the older homes in Coldhurst, Alberta, even rallying the community to build the local Royal Canadian Legion and a community center. And the community center has a room named after Ron for all his contribution and support of the local community. I think that's a testament, to a man who at one time had a very bleak, unknown future after his accident, but turned around and was able to really make an impact on his community. The next fear is our fear of death. Now, who isn't afraid of death? People with underlying conditions with COVID-19 are scared of catching COVID-19 because they have compromised immune systems. The elderly are susceptible to really being hit hard. And if they do, they end up alone in a hospital. Their support systems cut off because family cannot come and visit them. Some people that were afraid for their family pulled them out of old age homes because they wanted to be there to support, hold their loved one's hand when they were afraid of either having COVID-19 or suffering from an ailment they already had. They pulled them out of the homes so they could offer comfort and support. Caregivers became sick and couldn't offer the support that they wanted, even when they wanted to. The local communities stood by all these first-line responders. There are signs in my neighborhood that say thank you to first-line responders, and I'm sure there are in many of yours. The fear of death was very large and is still, sadly, large for some people with underlying conditions who don't want to catch COVID-19, don't want to get sick, and are relying on healthcare to be there. Relying on family and support to be there, especially for the elderly. Death, fear of death, is something we all have. We all grow old, and it will get all of us at one point or another. Daisy lost her first husband in the early days of World War II in 1939. She was a widow and pregnant, and her husband died 28 days before his son was born. A few years later, Daisy, a single parent, was home with her young son when the air raid sirens went off. This wasn't anything new to Britons at the time. She picked up her son and ran to the nearest shelter. While Daisy was running towards the shelter, her young son looked over her shoulder and watched the bombs drop and watched his home slowly disappear behind smoke and the sound of dropping bombs and death and destruction all around him. He watched his home disappear. Obviously, staying put would have meant certain death for them. They were literally running for their lives. Later in life, Daisy's son said that he never realized just how close he and his mother came to death, and that he wasn't afraid of anything. As he said, growing up, what's left to fear when you've already faced possible death anyway? Luckily, the support of the community. They worked with other family members and close friends to get by when they lost their home. They lived together and was able to pull together and support each other. The fear of insignificance. Misinformation can create confusion, especially with COVID-19 right now. All the misinformation that is floating about can make people even susceptible to increased danger. With all the information that is flowing about, some of it being fake, some of it not being proven, can actually open up people to more dangers and cause people to do the wrong things. If the message isn't clear, then the worst possible outcomes can occur. The deaths of over 1 million people and still messages of what to do get hijacked through politics, people, chaos, creating a cycle that continues even as I speak. If someone does feel insignificant, regardless of COVID-19, there are a few things that a person can try and do. Get out of the house, go for a walk. Volunteer if you're able to help those less fortunate. Help in the community, can be anything. Join a group, can be online. Donate to charities, help others less fortunate. I know many of these things aren't possible due to COVID-19, and it's difficult to socialize and increase that support system. But a lot of people are turning to the internet for support. So just join a forum and talk to someone. Or if you need to talk to someone, join a forum and just listen. Sometimes listening is the best thing we can do to support each other. Social media has helped give voice to people who need it. It's helped give a voice to people who don't have one, in good and bad, but the bad voices can be a separate topic altogether, so I'll just focus on the good for now. You can join groups and talk about your favorite subjects, share recipes, your favorite band, songs, learn instruments, or just care for each other. The internet can bring people together. It can push people apart, but during COVID-19, it can bring us together. It can bring us closer together with family members so that you don't feel insignificant. I talked about the San Francisco earthquake earlier. There was something I didn't tell you there with insignificance. When the Army was doing those fire breaks, they were protecting the affluent areas. They were protecting the rich. The areas they destroyed and burned down were the areas of the poor. How's that for insignificant? It didn't matter. The only people that mattered were the rich, and the poor were insignificant, and their homes were burned and destroyed to protect the homes of the rich. I mentioned Ron earlier. Ron and his wife Jean felt insignificant at one time when they still lived in the UK. Back in 1968, Ron had his own carpentry company, and he was doing well. He got a great contract with a bigger company, and that bigger company went bankrupt, owing Ron a lot of money, and he couldn't get it because the government at that time, as Jean says, turned on the labor force. There was no one to turn to for Ron to try and get his money back, get what he needed to support his family. There was no support for the little guy, as Jean says. So he decided from that point of view that the government saw him as insignificant, that he wasn't a big company, he was just a worker and was not important enough. Hence, he packed up his family and moved to Canada out west in the province of Alberta to stay with family they hardly even knew, but who supported him more than the government of the UK at the time. Kyron felt insignificant. He had diabetes. It was diagnosed in 1998. And in 2003, 2004, he was found on the floor of his home. Rushed to emergency. Doctors really didn't take his case that important. He was young. They thought he'll be fine. Don't worry about it. So he was kind of left alone to his own devices with family waiting out in the lobby, not being looked after. But they knew how serious it was. They knew something the doctors and the nurses at that time didn't, almost leading to fistfights. Kyron's support system was literally fighting for him. Finally, the doctors and nurses said, fine, we'll take another more detailed look. It was a lucky thing they did, because it was discovered if another hour or two had gone by, Kyron would have died. His support system fought for him. With COVID-19, for many, our support systems are stronger because we're closer to our families now. Some of us ended up having to live with our families again, move back in with our parents when our universities closed down, or we lost our jobs, lost our homes. Friends have reached out. Everyone's talking through different social media sites, Zoom meetings, different applications that are out there to stay closer and learning more about each other as we spend this time together. Organizations are doing some of the same. You know, they have to get to know their supply chains a lot more, as I mentioned earlier on. They're getting to understand really what's important to them. Some of the things that were deemed important really aren't. All those binders of information that was needed never made their way home to people that are working there now. Those binders are still sitting in desks or on bookshelves in the office place. So they're not that as important as they thought they were. And the community is the same too. Our front care workers, you know, the people that work in the hospitals, and the people that pick up our garbage. You know, sanitation, that's important. Sanitation stops the spread of disease. You know, so everyone, we've now really started to find out what our support systems are and what important support systems are out there. I mentioned Dr. Michael Unger earlier, and he says resilience requires a sense of belonging, purpose, meaning. Belonging is more than attachments to individuals. It is a sense of connection to a group, an idea, a culture, or a nation. And that's when I mentioned the groups, getting to know each other via the internet or different chat rooms and different forums, reaching out, you know, and finding common ground and helping each other. And he talks about an interesting example here. Think of the story of Cinderella. Do you think Cinderella would have met her prince if she didn't have her support system? We had the mice make the dress. We had the mice and other creatures, shall we say, you know, in the story, talk to her as she always had problems with her stepmother and stepsisters. The fairy godmother, who made her look beautiful, changed the horses to carriages, you know, and the pumpkins to carriages. Would the story have had the same outcome if not for Cinderella's support system? I don't think so. It would have probably had a very different outcome. Henry used to tell me of people on the Blitz during World War II, of how people in shelters used to play and sing music to each other, to comfort each other, knowing that above ground their homes were on fire, you know, and maybe destroyed. Families helped each other out, took each other in, you know, and supported each other. James has an interesting story. He's down in Lismore, Australia, and Lismore had floods in March and April 2017. And James runs North Coast Wholesale and Distribution in Lismore. And they had to take care of their business, of course, you know, make sure that if there were any major floods that affected their building, that they could continue operating, that they would be fine, that everything would work, their employees were safe and taken care of. And then he did something different. He turned around and took the trucks the refrigerated trucks and drove around the community of Lismore, the downtown area, picking up the perishable items from stores who didn't have the same means that they did, that were suffering. Took all their stuff, in their refrigerated trucks back to their warehouse and kept it safe until the waters receded and they could take all that information back. Now, how's that for being part of a community, supporting each other? Because of his nature of his business, he had a lot of connections and he reached out to help others in a time when he himself and his business was also being impacted. Here's another example, Gander, Newfoundland. Imagine September 11th, 2001, being on an airplane coming from Europe to the United States and finding yourself landing in Gander, Newfoundland. More people landed in Gander, Newfoundland on the airplanes than actually live in the town. And the town came together to support everyone there. As a passenger, I would have been fearful, not knowing what was going on. But the people of Gander stood up, supported not just each other, because they always did, but supported all these outsiders that were going through chaos, had no idea what the future was going to provide for them. Took them into their homes, their hotels, drove them around, fed them, clothed them. There's even an award-winning musical about it, Come From Away. And believe it or not, a couple of marriages came out of that situation. Now, I've told you, I'm forgetting the point here. Barry Moltz, the author of Bounce, People and Resilience, says people become more resilient based on the connections they have in their life and their support structure. Same is true for organizations, and I've mentioned it with supply chains, knowing your clients, which is a lot of what financial institutions do. Know your client, know your customers, know all your vendors that come in, who looks after your cafeteria, know the people that come in and change your mats. Know the people that you talk to every day, in another region, in your same office. Know who they are, get to know them, talk to them. Know your neighbor. I know all of mine, and I know if something happened here, I know a few neighbors that'd be on the phone right away calling for help, or would be breaking down the door to help me, depending on the situation, of course. Now, I have told you some of my support structure already. And if I wasn't clear on what some of my support structure is, I want to reiterate. Ron and Jean are my uncle and auntie. Kathleen, well, that was my grandma. And yes, that's me in the picture. Daisy is my nan. Henry, my granddad. James, down in Lismore, Australia, he's my cousin. Kyron, who had the problem, who almost got into fist fights in a hospital to make sure he was getting the care he needed, is my brother. The guy who faced fear over the shoulder of his mom, well, that was my dad, Alfred. And yeah, that's me again. So I'm sure you can probably figure out Gail is my mom. That's my support structure. They're here for me. Who do you have in yours? Build those relationships. You become more resilient by the relationships you build and the experiences you go through together as an individual, as an organization, and as part of a community. Resilience does come about by facing your fears, getting over your fears, and having long established support systems. Don't wait till it's too late to look around for help. Just start your support systems now. Say hello. Ask someone how they're doing. Face your fears, and with the right support, you can become resilient. Thank you. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.